Hey guys, tonight we're slipping behind the golden drapes of time into the hush of a story that doesn't shout, but it shakes the heavens. We're headed to ancient Persia, where sandal-clad footsteps echo down marble halls, and a hidden god watches everything unfold in sacred silence. You'll walk with Esther tonight, not as a queen on a throne, but as a girl whose world quietly collapses and quietly rebuilds. The skies above her don't flash with prophecy, but trust me, the divine is thick in the air. You probably won't survive this kind of quiet unless you've got wings or a direct line to the Almighty. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes into a quiet courtyard in Susa long before Esther is queen. A soft wind lifts dust from stone paths, where small feet once learned to run without parents to call them home. You hear the whisper of sandals, not yours, hers. Esther's. Hadassah, really. Her Hebrew name soft like a secret, strong like a root beneath dry earth. She's maybe 12. Her eyes already carry more silence than laughter. There's no crown here, no perfumed oils. Just Mordecai, her older cousin, who watches over her like a tired sparrow guarding the last egg in the nest. He's no prophet, no warrior, just present. In a world full of absent fathers and vanished mothers, presence is a miracle. You walk beside them. You notice how Esther doesn't speak much, not because she's shy, but because she listens. You can almost feel how the world around her begins to listen back. Mordecai teaches her scriptures in half-hushed voices. Not the public ones, not the scrolls rolled out in synagogues, no. These are the stories whispered to preserve a soul. The exile has made everything fragile. You realize something odd: there's no temple here. No priestly robes, no visible altar. And yet this is holy ground, because two exiles believe it still matters to tell the truth. They speak of Sarah's laughter, of Ruth's fierce loyalty, and sometimes Esther dares to ask about the woman who bore her. Mordecai never answers with much, just says you've got her eyes and lets the moment pass like incense. One day there's a procession in the city. You walk in its shadow, following the curious turn of heads and distant trumpets. The king Xerxes is choosing a new queen. The old one, Vashti, refused something. They say she dishonored the crown. Others whisper she simply said no. That word no is heavier than gold in Susa. You can feel it press against the palace walls. Esther doesn't volunteer to join the selection. Girls don't get to volunteer. They're chosen, like spices for the king's table. You watch as soldiers move through the streets, eyes scanning for beauty that can be owned. When they point to Esther, she doesn't scream, doesn't run. She just looks at Mordecai. He says nothing, because there's nothing to say, but later that night he presses a prayer into her hands, not written, just spoken. You don't catch all the words, but you hear the last part clearly: don't forget who you are, even when no one else remembers. You ride in the back of the royal cart with her, surrounded by other girls wrapped in silk but hollow with fear. She doesn't cry. She counts steps, breathes slowly. 1, 2, 3. You feel her counting each as if it's a rope anchoring her to something that cannot be taken. There's a question hanging in the air, and you realize you've been asking it too. Why her? Why does God allow a girl with no parents, no nation, no power to be taken from the little she still had? Some believe the story of Esther is one of divine rescue. Others argue it's a quiet critique of empire and how survival sometimes looks like compromise. But right now, you're inside her story, not the scholars. And inside it, the question isn't why me, but what now? Esther's beauty is undeniable, but it's not loud. It glows from stillness, from how she doesn't need to perform. In the harem, she learns how to bathe in myrrh, how to walk like silk, how to wear a crown without looking like she wants it. But even here in scented rooms and marble corridors, she hides who she truly is. Mordecai told her, don't reveal your people, your name, your God. Not yet. There's wisdom in shadows. You start to understand sometimes God hides us before he reveals us. You find yourself drawn not just to Esther, but to the quiet bravery it takes to survive where you don't belong. To wake up every day knowing your name is hidden, your faith muted, your truth unsafe, and still somehow you remain faithful. You think of yourself now. What have you hidden, and not from shame, but for survival? You feel a strange comfort. God's never needed loudness to work miracles. Sometimes he prefers silence. You remember the young girl watching shadows cross the courtyard. You remember her breath before stepping into the palace. You remember the moment a name was tucked away like a candle under a bowl, not extinguished, just protected. And now you realize you're just beginning. You glide forward past the moment Esther first stepped through the palace threshold. The stone halls don't echo like you thought they might. Instead, everything seems padded, softened by perfumes and political fog. You follow her steps as she's led into chambers built for performance, not rest. Gold is everywhere, on walls, on necks, in eyes pretending not to see pain. But it's the silence you notice most. No one speaks of the girls who came before. No one whispers about the ones who cried at night or disappeared by morning. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a kingdom that swallows names. You stay close as Esther enters the quarters where the women wait, the harem. A word that sounds like silk but feels like captivity. Her name is hidden, folded like a prayer in her heart. Her faith even quieter. You meet Haggai, next keeper of the women, a eunuch trusted by the king. His face is unreadable, but his eyes pause on Esther longer than most. Something about her, not just the way she looks, but the way she doesn't need to look. She listens, watches, and says less than everyone else. Haggai gives her favor, just like that. Others fight for oils and jewels and extra privileges. Esther receives without demanding. You feel the tension in the room as other girls notice. Jealousy in the palace isn't loud either, but it's sharp, like sandals stepped on in silence. Esther's days are long, 12 months of preparation. You watch as she submits to rituals that feel foreign, scrubs her skin with myrrh, wraps herself in robes that weren't made by Hebrew hands, smells like a woman the king might want, even though everything inside her still smells of home. Here's the secret: she never resists the process, but she never loses herself to it either. Some nights she stares at the moon through a lattice window. You sit beside her. She doesn't speak, but you hear her thoughts. Is God still with me if I never say his name? Is faith silent or spoken? You remember that God's name is never mentioned in the entire book of Esther. Not once. And yet, can you not feel him here in the way Haggai favors her? In the way Esther receives what she didn't ask for? In the quiet way she holds her ground wrapped in perfume and silence? Some theologians say God is absent in Esther, his name at least. Others believe this was deliberate, that the very absence is the message. He is most present when he seems most hidden. He works in whispers, not trumpets. Esther waits and you wait with her. The night comes, her night, the one every girl dreads and imagines. She will go to the king, one night to change her life or disappear into legendless silence. But Esther doesn't ask for anything. No extra jewels, no special requests, just what Haggai suggests. You feel her faith in that decision, not in him, but in the God guiding her unseen. You hold your breath as she walks the corridor, heart pressed against ribs like thunder in a cage. The door opens, and here's the strange holy truth: you don't go inside with her. No one does. The story itself goes silent here. No dialogue, no description of what was said or done. Just this: she pleased the king more than any other woman. She is crowned Queen of Persia, but in that crown is tension, because she still hasn't revealed who she is. You wonder if she even knows anymore. Who is Esther, Hebrew girl, or Persian queen, faithful servant, or royal icon, or both? And what if God has made her to be both, not torn between, but tethered by two worlds? Outside the palace, Mordecai lingers. He doesn't enter her new life. He stands at the gate. You join him. You watch through slits in stone as the girl he raised now wears the weight of royalty. But she doesn't forget. She sends word to him, still listens, still anchored. One day, while stationed near the court, Mordecai hears something. A plot. 2 guards, Bigthan and Teresh, planning to assassinate the king. The moment is brief but critical. He tells Esther. Esther tells the king. The plot is stopped. You think this is it. Mordecai will be honored, rewarded, lifted high. But nothing happens. The story just moves on. Some say it's injustice. Others call it divine delay. You start to sense a theme: God's timing always lingers just long enough to test your faith, but never too long to destroy it. The record of Mordecai's loyalty is written down. That's it. Not rewarded, just recorded. And yet, You smile, because you already know the seed planted in silence grows in the dark. You've seen it before. Back in Esther's chamber, the crown is heavier than it looks. She walks quieter now, watches more than she speaks. She still hasn't told anyone where she comes from, but you can see it in the way she kneels to pray when no one watches. That's where the divine reveals itself most clearly, not in miracles, but in mundane moments full of quiet obedience. And just as you begin to rest, the music in the palace shifts. A new man is rising, his name, Haman. You'll meet him soon, but for now, stay close to Esther. Watch how a girl can sit in silence, wear a crown she never asked for, and still walk the halls like someone heaven hasn't forgotten, because heaven hasn't. You follow the sound of polished boots and hushed greetings. A new name begins to pass between lips like smoke rising toward a storm. Haman. At first, he's just a presence, polite, powerful, promoted. But in Susa, power moves quickly, and Haman's rise is more than ascent, it's orchestration. You trail his steps through the palace corridors, noticing how others bow as he passes. Not just out of custom, but from fear sharpened by uncertainty. His robes seem stitched with ambition, his voice smooth as oil, but with the weight of a blade tucked just beneath. Esther sees him, hears the rumors, but says nothing. A queen must be quieter than her surroundings, and Haman's shadow is long. Outside the palace gates, Mordecai stands at his usual place. Unnoticed until he refuses something that everyone else does without thought, he does not bow. You're with him. You feel the moment thicken like the air before thunder. This isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. Mordecai knows who he is, a Jew, a descendant of exiles, but with a spine that bows only to the divine. Others watch, eyes dart, guards mutter. Haman, of course, is told. And suddenly you see how small actions in the kingdom of men can ripple through the courts of heaven. One refusal ignites a rage that would scorch an entire people, because Haman's pride is too swollen to handle one unbent man. Some say Haman's hatred is political. Others point to history. He's an Agagite, possibly a descendant of the enemies King Saul once failed to destroy. And Mordecai, a descendant of Saul's line. A rivalry not just of personalities, but of blood and legacy. You don't need a scroll to know what happens next. Haman goes to the king, not with a complaint, but a plan. There is a people he begins scattered and different. They do not obey the king's laws. It is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. You feel the venom in his phrasing, not names, just categories. A people, a label, an erasure. He offers silver for their destruction, a quiet genocide dressed in elegant language. And Xerxes, he hands Haman the royal signet ring without asking who these people are. You stand there stunned as Haman drafts a decree on the 13th day of the 12th month. All Jews, young and old, men and women, are to be destroyed. He sends it out to every province. Riders gallop, seals are pressed, the kingdom obeys. And Susa falls silent. You return to the city square with Mordecai. His clothes are torn, ash on his head. He weeps not performatively, not politically, but from a soul that suddenly sees how close extinction has come. He stands at the gate as far as he's allowed to go. Queens don't see sackcloth, or at least they're not supposed to. But Esther hears. You follow the messenger. The room tenses as the scroll is read aloud. The royal decree, her people targeted, executed, erased. She grips the paper with fingers that tremble more than she'll let show, and you feel the earthquake behind her calm face. All this time, she hid who she was. But now the cost of silence is measured in lives. She sends garments to Mordecai, hoping maybe he'll quiet down, but he refuses. So she sends Hathach, her most trusted servant, a question folded in royal concern. What's happening? And Mordecai's answer cuts through every layer of comfort. Go to the king, beg for your people, now. You watch her freeze, not out of cowardice, but calculation. You can feel it in her bones. This isn't a simple request. Approaching the king uninvited means death unless he extends his golden scepter. And Esther hasn't been summoned in over a month. She sends word back, if I go, I may die. And Mordecai's response, it lands like thunder. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The words hang in the air like sacred fire. You feel their weight on your chest. For such a time as this. The phrase echoes not just through Esther's heart, but through your own. Because maybe you've wondered too why you were born when you were, why you're here. Why things fell apart, then fell together, and now press against you from all sides. Esther doesn't respond immediately. She paces. Prays, though no words are written down. Maybe she remembers being a girl in the courtyard. Maybe she wonders if she's still that girl at all. But then you see it. Resolve. She sends her reply. Go gather all the Jews. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my maids will fast as well. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. You don't cheer, you don't even breathe, because holy courage never shouts, it simply stands. You watch as she removes her royal garments and wraps herself in fasting robes. No perfume, no jewels, just skin hunger and prayer. And in that moment, she becomes something more than queen. She becomes intercessor. And heaven, though still silent, seems suddenly very near. You drift into night. The city of Susa is quiet, but the quiet isn't peace. It's the breath held between thunder and downpour. Inside her private chamber, Esther doesn't sleep. Neither do you. She sits by a flickering lamp, fasting robe loose around her shoulders. 3 nights of no food, no water. Just silence, prayer, and a growing sense of purpose. You feel your own mouth dry in sympathy. Fasting isn't just the absence of food, it's the emptying of everything that distracts from God. Across the city, Mordecai does the same. So do the scattered Jews of Susa, praying in homes, whispering psalms from memory, their voices barely louder than the rustle of curtains. The decree still hangs in the air like a plague, but they don't run. They fast. Because if God doesn't speak, they will clear a path for him anyway. Esther, in her final night of fasting, sits by a mirror. Not to look at herself, but to gather the strength to put the crown back on. Because that's the paradox you begin to understand. To defy the king, she must look her most royal. The 4th morning breaks. You watch as she bathes with aching limbs, oils her hair, wraps herself in the richest robes, paints her eyes not for seduction, but for remembrance that she is not just a supplicant, she is queen. Her steps are slow measured. You trail her down the palace corridor, feeling the cold floor beneath your spirit's feet. The door to the throne room looms ahead. Here's what you realize: this is where most stories would pause, breathe, build music. But this story, it walks forward in silence. She enters. You follow, barely breathing. The throne sits high. Xerxes reclines in gold and authority. Guards tense, eyes widen. The law is clear, no one comes uninvited, not even the queen. You count the seconds with her heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. Then he extends the golden scepter. The room exhales. You hear the quiet snap of destiny taking its first step toward fulfillment. Xerxes smiles. What is it, Queen Esther? What do you desire? Up to half my kingdom, it is yours. You blink, not because of the offer, but because of her answer. She doesn't ask for deliverance, not yet. Instead, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I've prepared. A banquet. You're tempted to scream in surprise, but then you remember Esther doesn't rush. Esther waits. And waiting is often the holiest work of all. Some believe Esther feared speaking too soon. Others think she sensed the divine tempo, the rhythm of timing invisible to the hurried. But one thing is clear, she is moving in step with something greater than strategy. She is moving in sync with God. The king agrees. Haman is summoned. He comes quickly, puffed with pride, honored beyond reason. To dine with the king and queen alone, his ego inflates like a festival tent. You sit in the corner of the banquet hall as dishes are brought, wine poured, laughter rising. Esther is calm, poised, warm, but you notice her eyes always watching, always weighing. She waits for the right moment. But when the king repeats his question, "What do you desire, Esther?" she doesn't reveal the truth. Instead, again, "Come to another banquet tomorrow, then I will tell you." And that's when you see it. She's buying time, not because she fears the king, but because she senses something must unfold first. And you're right to think so, because that night Haman leaves the palace feeling untouchable. He struts past the gates nose high until he sees Mordecai. The man still will not bow. Everything inside Haman curdles. At home he rages to his wife and friends. "All my wealth, my status, even dining with royalty, none of it satisfies me as long as that Jew sits in defiance." You watch the moment pride metastasizes into cruelty. Zeresh's wife whispers a solution: build a gallows, 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. Haman smiles. You feel the weight of the wood already being cut. But here is where the divine irony begins to hum, because that same night the king cannot sleep. He tosses, turns, the bed is too warm, the air too still, the shadows too long. He does what kings do when they can't sleep. He asks for the royal chronicles to be read aloud. And guess what page they open to? You already know. They read the story of Mordecai, who once uncovered a plot to assassinate the king. The same Mordecai who was never rewarded. Xerxes sits up. Wait, what honor was given to this man? None, my king. The silence is electric. Some say this is coincidence. Others call it divine orchestration. Either way, the hinge of history turns at midnight in the margins of forgotten records. The king decides Mordecai must be honored. And just as dawn breaks, just as Haman enters the court to ask for Mordecai's death, the king greets him with a question that sends chills down your spine. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman, drunk on self-worship, believes the king speaks of him. His answer is lavish. A royal robe, a horse, a noble official to proclaim his greatness through the city. The king nods. Excellent, go at once. Do all that for Mordecai the Jew. You don't cheer, not yet. The story isn't done, but you do smile. Because sometimes God's greatest jokes are holy reversals. And the gallows meant for the righteous, they remain for the one who built them. The morning sun stretches over Susa like a gold-threaded veil, but not everyone greets it with joy. You walk beside Haman now, though he doesn't see you. His steps, usually swift and straight, falter as he approaches Mordecai with the king's robes folded in his trembling arms. The noble horse waits nearby, its breath steaming in the chill of early day. You can almost hear the cruel irony groaning beneath the pageantry. Mordecai stands by the gate just as he always does, unbowed, unworried, unreadable. Haman can barely form the words. This is what shall be done for the man the king delights to honor. You feel the tension in his throat as he parades Mordecai through the city. Every shout of praise is a dagger turned inward. The crowd watches in stunned silence. Some cheer, others whisper, but Mordecai. He doesn't gloat, doesn't smirk. He sits atop the horse like someone who knows this is not the victory. Not yet. When it's done, Mordecai returns to the gate, as if nothing happened. And Haman? He rushes home, his pride dragging behind him like torn silk. His wife and advisors meet him at the door, their faces no longer proud, no longer plotting. If Mordecai is of Jewish descent, Zeresh says quietly, you will not overcome him. You will surely fall before him. You hear it too, that sudden shift in tone. The one that happens when people realize the hand of heaven is moving and not in their favor. But Haman has no time to respond. Royal messengers arrive, summoning him again to Queen Esther's second banquet. No time to mourn, no time to re-strategize. Just enough time to wipe sweat from his brow and mask dread with a practiced smile. You drift into the palace with him. The hall is smaller than yesterday, more intimate and colder. Esther sits already in place, radiant but still, like a lake before a storm. Xerxes is cheerful, curious, maybe even a little tipsy from the wine. He turns to his queen with the warmth of assumed loyalty. Now, Esther, what is your request? Up to half my kingdom it shall be granted. This is it. You feel your heart tighten. She's waited, fasted, watched every detail align like stars bending under divine choreography. She stands. Her voice is steady but carries centuries of exiled cries behind it. If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, let my life be spared, and not only mine, but the lives of my people. For we have been sold to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. You could hear a pin drop in the next province. The king's eyes flash. Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther turns, and with the calm of holy fire she speaks. The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. The room cracks. Xerxes rises, a storm coiled in royal robes. Haman's face drains. He looks not at the king, but at Esther. For mercy, for explanation, for escape. He stumbles toward her, pleading, just as the king storms out to the garden, perhaps to collect his fury, perhaps to decide whether judgment will be immediate. But Haman in his desperation throws himself onto the queen's couch just as the king returns. And the scene is perfect, tragic, orchestrated. Will he even assault the queen while I am in the house? Xerxes bellows. You sense the heavenly gavel fall. One of the eunuchs, Harbona, silent until now, speaks. There is a gallows 50 cubits high standing at Haman's house. He built it for Mordecai, the man who saved the king's life. You don't even need to look at Xerxes. You know what he says? Hang him on it. And so they do. The gallows that rose from pride now holds its architect. Some say this is justice. Others argue it's poetic reckoning. But you feel a shiver run through your spirit, not of vengeance, but of awe. Because this is the kind of story only God could write. One where silence isn't absence, but setup. where the enemy builds his own undoing, where a hidden girl becomes the key to a nation's survival. You walk with Esther as she returns to her chambers. No celebration, not yet. Her people still face death. The decree is still law. Haman is gone, but his words remain in ink, stamped by the king's own signet. And yet, you notice something new in her face. Not triumph, but release. The secret she's carried, the name she's hidden, it's spoken now. And once a truth is spoken in love and courage, it cannot be unspoken. You sit by her window as the sun lowers over Susa. You think of the gallows, of Mordecai's silent dignity, of fasting prayers rising into the night. You remember the feast where death was reversed, and still you feel the story turning, because this wasn't the end. The law remains. The danger still breathes. But now Esther is no longer hiding, and God, he was never absent, only waiting. The night after Haman's fall is unusually still. You sit near the palace window watching Esther trace the edge of her goblet. It's empty now, but her thoughts are full. One enemy is gone, but death still hangs in the air like a curtain of smoke. You realize something strange: the decree to destroy the Jews is still law. Because in Persia, the word of a king once sealed with his signet ring cannot be revoked, not even by the king himself. You feel that tension settle over Esther's shoulders. She's revealed her identity, exposed her soul, risked her life, but her people still face annihilation. Mordecai is brought into the court the next day, now clothed in royal garments with the ring of power, Haman's ring, slipped onto his finger by the king himself. The irony is sharp: the very instrument of destruction has become a tool for salvation, or at least the beginning of it. Esther falls again at the king's feet. Her voice doesn't tremble. You hear it now, clearer, stronger. If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, to destroy the Jews. Xerxes listens. You watch his jaw tighten, not in anger but in frustration. I cannot revoke what was sealed, he says, but you may write another decree. And just like that, the authority shifts. Mordecai and Esther are no longer subjects. They are instruments of divine reversal. You follow Mordecai through the hall of scribes. Scrolls stretch out before him, ink pots glisten, his hand does not shake. He writes with clarity and with urgency. You lean in to read. The king's edict grants the Jews in every city the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy any armed force that might attack them, their women and their children. A mirror decree, one written in the same languages, sealed with the same ring, dispatched with the same speed. But this one, it's a lifeline. You travel with the messengers. Their horses gallop through provinces, stirring dust and hope. The people read the edict. Eyes widen, hearts lift. Some don't believe it at first. How could justice arrive through the same system that threatened them? Others weep openly. You hear them in alleyways and temple ruins. And Mordecai. He walks through the city in royal robes, blue and white linen and purple, with a great golden crown. Not as a tyrant, not as a conqueror, but as a man who once sat by the gate unnoticed, praying into the wind. The city of Susa rejoices, not with loud parades, but with the quiet kind of celebration: bread shared in doorways, laughter returning to the eyes of the fearful oil lamps flickering longer into the night. But not everyone rejoices. There are enemies still. People who see the new decree not as protection, but as a challenge. A threat to their power, their prejudice, their control. You realize something deep here. God's protection does not erase conflict. It prepares people for it. Back in Esther's chamber, she watches the moon rise. You sit with her again, close enough to hear the breath she lets go after so many weeks of holding it. Her maids move quietly around her, bringing water-warm cloth slices of figs. She eats now, slowly, intentionally. The fasting has ended, but the work is not done. She knows the battle still approaches, and yet you feel no fear in her bones, just the ache of having stood when it mattered most. Some theologians question the ethics of this second edict. Why allow for violence at all? Why mirror the enemy's decree? Others argue it was never about revenge. It was about defense, about dignity, about reclaiming the right to exist. You don't answer the question, you just sit in it. Because truth is rarely simple, and sometimes to preserve the innocent power must be used not to dominate, but to shield. You watch as Mordecai and Esther continue to send word across the provinces, reminding the Jews stand together. Defend each other. Do not be the aggressor, but do not be silent when danger comes. You feel the tempo shift again. The tide has turned, but not yet crested. Still, something is building. A holy tension, a divine pressure. And then you remember the king's sleepless night. The moment everything began to pivot. A quiet scroll, a forgotten act of loyalty, a name once left unrewarded. You see how the divine works not just in climactic scenes, but in pauses, delays, moments that seem forgotten but never are. God's memory does not forget justice, even when the world does. And so now as Esther rests, as Mordecai prepares, as the people sharpen their courage, you too prepare. Because the day is coming. And when it arrives, you'll see just how far heaven is willing to go to protect a people who never stopped whispering his name, even when the page never wrote it down. The day breaks not with war drums, but with birdsong. You walk the streets of Susa before the heat rises. Markets are quieter than usual. Eyes scan doorways, hands grip tools a little tighter just in case they need to become weapons. Today is the 13th day of Adar, the day the original decree said the Jews would die. But this time they are not waiting to be slaughtered. They are ready. You find yourself standing beside a father's sword on his hip arms around his children. A grandmother recites psalm fragments in the corner of the home, her voice trembling but firm. The walls feel thin, but the spirit inside them is not. Outside, word spreads fast. No one dares touch the Jews. Across the provinces, fear shifts its allegiance. Some who once plotted against God's people now stand down. Others, seeing the rising favor of Mordecai and the divine thread trailing behind Esther, begin to join the Jews, converting or aligning out of reverence or self-preservation. You see something mysterious happens when God's favor becomes visible. Even enemies begin to hesitate. But not all. Some attack, some rage, but the Jews stand together stronger than they thought they could be. You don't hear screams, you hear resolve. You see defenders, not destroyers. It's not a story of vengeance, it's a story of a people reclaiming the right to exist out loud. And the scrolls will later record it with solemnity that the Jews struck down those who sought their harm, but never plundered. Never took riches, just defense, no looting, no bloodlust. That detail matters. Because you feel God's quiet pleasure in restraint, in the dignity of a people who remember they are not merely survivors, but image bearers. In Susa, the capital itself, the battle is fiercer. Haman's sons, 10 of them, rise to fight to avenge their father's downfall. You pass them in a dreamlike moment. They wear pride like armor, but it shatters on impact. Each of them falls, quickly, completely. Later, Esther stands before the king again, and here you see something unexpected. She asks that those in Susa be granted one more day to defend themselves, and that Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. You pause. The imagery is heavy. Hanging the dead isn't that excessive. Some scholars wrestle with this moment. Others see it as symbolic, a public reversal, a visual end to a legacy of hatred. Not just punishment, but a statement. This will not rise again. The king agrees, and so it is done. In the outer provinces, the Jews also prevail. They gather together not just to fight, but to remember. You see bonfires lit, scrolls shared. Children told stories of how deliverance came not through might alone, but through a queen's voice and a sleepless king. You drift through a village in the far corner of the empire. A little girl offers you a fig, even though she doesn't know you're there. Her mother whispers that today is holy, even if no priest has declared it so. And suddenly you feel the shift. Fear, which once draped the community like a funeral cloth, is lifted, and in its place, joy. Not loud, noisy festival joy, not yet. This is quiet joy, the kind that sits with you, breathes with you, moves into places fear once lived and gently asks it to leave. You return to Susa. Mordecai walks the streets like a man who never asked for greatness but wears it with grace anyway. He nods to each passerby. There is no chariot, no trumpet, just robes that sway and a presence that carries the scent of righteousness. People begin to approach him not with flattery but with gratitude. You sit beside him that night as he sharpens a quill and begins drafting a letter. His hand is steady, his expression calm but full of memory. This letter will go out to all 127 provinces. A command to remember, to mark the days of deliverance, the 14th and 15th of Adar, days not of battle but of rest, of feasting, of gifts to one another and to the poor. And so Purim is born, not from ritual but from remembrance, a celebration carved from sorrow, a holiday that says we survived, we matter. God moved even when unseen. You lean in as Mordecai seals the scroll. He doesn't call himself a prophet, doesn't claim a vision. He just writes what happened. Sometimes that's all faith is, recording the miracle and not editing it to fit a neater version. The scroll is sent. Esther adds her signature. Her presence, still silent, still powerful, turns this moment into legacy. From now on, every year, Jewish families will read her story. Children will stomp when Haman's name is said. Dried fruit will be shared. Laughter will rise like incense. And in the backdrop of every candle, every sweet, every whispered prayer, the silence of God will speak again. You rest your head now just for a moment. You've walked through exile and fear banquets and gallows crowns and fasts, but you feel something deeper than resolution. You feel trust, and that's the real victory. You wake to the scent of roasted grain and dried dates. The 14th day of Adar has come, and with it something that doesn't quite feel like victory, something quieter, deeper, rest. You walk the streets of Susa, no cries, no clash of swords, only neighbors embracing doorways decorated with vines, tables prepared for shared meals. It's not the celebration of conquerors. It's the joy of those who almost didn't make it. And yet here they are. You pause beside a child balancing a basket of figs and nuts, delivering gifts from house to house. Her laughter rings out as she's offered two in return. One for her and one for the angels watching her mother jokes. That's the tone of today's celebration, with a whisper of eternity. The Jews have defended themselves, survived. But survival isn't the whole story. What makes this holy is what comes after the decision to rejoice. Some believe that joy is automatic after danger passes, but you know better now. Joy is a choice. And in Susa, in every province from India to Kush, they choose it. Esther and Mordecai gather again, not to issue a new command, but to affirm this new tradition, Purim. You walk beside them through a corridor bright with lanterns. Scrolls are passed from hand to hand, and you hear the gentle repetition of the word, remember. The letter they send out is clear: every year on these days you will feast. You will rest. You will give to those in need. You will tell your children the story, not with sorrow, but with joy. And in that act, you feel something sacred. Because remembrance isn't just about the past, it's about keeping the soul awake. Esther never speaks publicly again, not in the scroll, not in the courts. She fades into the background with the quiet of someone who's finished the assignment heaven whispered into her bones. You wonder why the silence. Some say she lived a long life in the palace, influencing policy through Mordecai. Others think she remained queen, but retreated into stillness. But scholars still debate what became of her. What is known, however, is this: her impact didn't end with her voice. Sometimes it's the decisions we make in the shadows that echo longer than any speech. Mordecai rises in rank, second only to King Xerxes. You watch him pass scrolls to scribes, counsel nobles, mediate disputes. But he too stays humble. He walks like someone who remembers sackcloth, someone who knows the difference between power and calling. You catch a moment, small but eternal. Mordecai stands at the gate again, just like old times. Not out of habit, but to remember. A single breeze lifts the hem of his robe, and for a second it looks like prayer. You walk deeper now, beyond the palace, beyond the provinces, into memory itself. Because this isn't just a story in the Bible. It's a pattern in the soul. The girl who didn't volunteer becomes the woman who saved a people. The man who once overheard a plot becomes the one whose voice shapes a nation. The enemy who built a gallows swings from its beam. And the God who is never named is everywhere. There's a lesson nestled deep inside the folds of Esther's silence. Divine purpose doesn't require divine thunder. Sometimes it only takes a whisper, a pause, a moment of brave restraint. Even today, scholars puzzle over why God's name isn't mentioned in the book of Esther. No, thus says the Lord, no burning bushes, no parting seas. But as you look back over everything, the fasts, the timing, the sleepless king, the mirrored decrees, you see it now. God wasn't absent, he was embedded. In the pauses between breaths, in the hands that prepared a meal, in the courage it took to say, if I perish, I perish. You feel it now in your own life, the moments that didn't seem miraculous at the time, but somehow rearranged your story when you weren't looking. The strange favor, the unexpected delay, the ordinary day that turned out to be pivotal. You realize Esther's story is your story too, because you've walked through seasons of hiddenness. You've carried truth inside you like a secret no one else saw. You've faced moments where silence cost you, and others where silence saved you. And perhaps, like her, you've wondered, what if I was placed here for such a time as this? The answer doesn't always come in prophecy or fireworks. Sometimes it comes in faithful presence, in being exactly who you are where you are for someone else's survival. So now, as the fires dim and laughter drifts into night air, you rest. Not just because the battle is over, but because the mystery has been made clear. The god who seemed hidden never was. You stirred gently, drifting in a haze of sweet spices and soft sandals brushing over marble floors. The palace is quiet, but not in mourning, not anymore. It's the hush that follows completion. The hush of a story still echoing between gold pillars. Esther sits in her private chamber gazing out at the moon. She's not wearing the crown tonight. Just a linen robe, hair braided simply down her back, her hands resting in her lap. She looks more like the girl named Hadassah than the queen called Esther. You sit across from her, knees tucked to your chest, not saying a word. There's no need. The silence between you is full of meaning. And then she opens a small carved box. Inside, the oils, the perfumes, the beauty rituals from her days in the harem. She lifts one vial, turns it in her hand. Myrrh, bitter, fragrant. The oil of mourning, the oil of preparation. She whispers, "Even now, I remember how afraid I was." Not regretful, just honest. You feel a truth sink into your chest. Courage is never the absence of fear, it's moving while holding hands with it. Some people think Esther became brave in the throne room, but you now know the truth. She became brave in the bath chamber, where every scrub of oil, every anointing, every perfumed cloth wasn't vanity, it was preparation. Not just for a king's gaze, but for a divine appointment. You remember that she asked for nothing extra, only what Haggai suggested. Why not? Because she was indifferent, but because she already knew who she was. The cosmetics were never the point, they were simply tools, and the true beauty was obedience. You walk back in time with her, tracing those 12 long months of preparation, the silence of the harem, the veils, the rehearsed movements, the uncertainty of what would come next. And yet God was in the waiting. Some theologians speculate on the symbolic meaning of the oils, 6 months of myrrh for dying to self. 6 months of sweet perfumes for embracing favor. Others say it was just a beauty regimen, nothing spiritual at all. But when you look through the lens of God's pattern, nothing is wasted. Even preparation becomes prophecy. Because what is myrrh if not the scent of sacrifice? And what is perfume if not the fragrance of presence? You feel this deeply now. Every hidden season in your life, the obscure, unseen, quiet days were not delays. They were consecrations. Esther didn't step into courage by accident. She was soaked in it. Soaked in surrender, soaked in silence, soaked in slow trust. You remember how the other girls scrambled for more jewels, more oils, more attention. Esther, she accepted only what she was given. It wasn't apathy, it was trust. She wasn't trying to win favor. She was already favored. She just walked in that truth even when the world didn't recognize it yet. And now neither did she need the crown to be queen. It was never the crown. It was always the calling. You move through the palace again, noticing the servants' glances as they pass her, the respect in their silence, the memory of the day she spoke not just for herself but for a nation. And yet she still prepares every morning, still braids her hair, still applies oil, not to be seen but to serve. That's the lesson blooming in this moment. True calling never stops preparing, even after the victory. You think about your own mirror, what you see in it, what you wish you saw. And now you hear the spirit in the back of your mind, almost playful. If you only knew what I was preparing you for. Esther didn't know, not at first, but she moved anyway, even with trembling hands, even when the oil stung, even when the beauty felt like a mask instead of a mission. And now you remember the first time she walked into the throne room. That quiet courage came from every small, faithful step before it. You wonder what small thing you're being prepared for. You wonder if your hidden place is holy. You wonder if the silence in your life is sacred. It is. It always was. Because in God's hands, preparation is prophecy. And you're not behind schedule. You're soaking in something eternal. You drift now to a place even quieter than the palace, the silence of a soul in waiting. It's the beginning of Esther's 3-day fast. No food, no water, just stillness. A city full of hungry prayers. And a queen barefoot robed kneeling somewhere in the palace shadows. You kneel with her. The night feels heavy, not from darkness, but from expectation. There's no vision, no angel, no dramatic voice from heaven, just breath, just waiting. Fasting doesn't feel glorious here. It feels thin. You can almost hear Esther's stomach tighten, her throat dry with the ache of restraint. Her maids fast too. No one speaks. The weight of every future breath hangs on this invisible surrender. You think fasting should be loud, intense, miraculous? But here it's holy by being painfully normal. No thunder, just obedience. Some say fasting is about getting God's attention. Others argue it's about silencing everything else, so his whisper can finally be heard. But you see, now it's not about changing God's mind. It's about changing yours. Esther had already made her decision. If I perish, I perish. But now she fasts, not to bargain, not to scheme, just to steady her soul, because bravery without intimacy can become arrogance, and she knows better. This is the part of the story most skip over, the invisible war before the visible act. You lean into her silence and begin to understand something new. It takes more strength to wait in God's presence than to walk into man's palace. Each hour of fasting stretches like a string drawn tight. You hear no encouragement, no guarantee. Just the sound of footsteps passing outside her door and the deeper sound of her breathing still. Mordecai fasts too, somewhere in the city. So do countless others, some in their homes, some outside the gates. You see mothers withholding food from crying infants, old men staring into oil lamps, teenagers biting down hunger with clenched fists and whispered psalms, and none of them know if it will work. But they fast anyway, because that's what faith sometimes looks like, choosing to believe before you see. You think back to other fasts in Scripture: Moses on the mountain, Daniel in Babylon, Jesus in the wilderness. Each time the fast doesn't summon miracles, it prepares for them. Here too, the miracle won't happen in the fasting, but the woman who walks into the throne room 3 days from now, she will not be the same woman who entered this silence. She will be consecrated. You look around her chamber. It's sparse now. No royal meals, no fabrics draped in indulgence, just walls, just breath, just the slow rhythm of surrender. You listen for her prayers. They're not spoken aloud, but you know them. Not because you hear them, but because you've prayed them too. God, if you're real, show me. God, if you're near, help me. God, if you're silent, stay with me anyway. She doesn't ask for safety, she asks for presence. And you feel it begin to fill the room. Not loud, but thick. It's like the air begins to change, subtle but undeniable. Her maids feel it too. One of them, still too young to understand, begins to cry softly. Another one joins her. And in the corner you see a single tear run down Esther's face, not from fear, but from clarity. This fast is working? Not by moving heaven's hand, but by realigning her own heart. There's a reason why heaven often prepares warriors through hunger. Because when your stomach is empty, your spirit starts to remember its true appetite. Power doesn't satisfy. Praise doesn't nourish. Only presence. Only purpose. By the second day, you see her straighten her posture. The robe hangs looser now. Her face is pale, but her eyes burn brighter. She hasn't eaten, but something in her feeds on faith. She studies the room now as if memorizing it. Not because she's afraid it'll be her last, but because she knows it may never be the same. The third day arrives with a golden hue. Light spills through the high window. Her fingers tremble as she ties the belt around her waist. You see her take one last moment to close her eyes and whisper, not to be heard, but to be held. You brought me this far. Don't let me leave your side now. Then she stands, straightens the robe, places the crown upon her head, not as decoration, but as declaration. She is ready. And you realize that courage wasn't born when she stepped into the throne room. It was forged here, in silence, in hunger, in surrender, in 3 days of fasting that starved fear and fed trust. So now, as she takes her first step toward the king, you feel it. This is no longer Hadassah, the orphan girl. This is Queen Esther, the intercessor, and her soul is full. You walk beside her now down the longest hallway in the world. At least it feels that way. Esther's steps are measured, but every one of them carries a prayer, a pause, a memory. Her fast is over, but the ache of hunger hasn't left her body. And yet there's no trace of trembling, only peace. A deep, still kind of peace, the kind that doesn't come from certainty, but from surrender. You remember she is doing something illegal. In this kingdom, no one approaches the king without being summoned, not even the queen. To enter without invitation is to gamble with your life, and yet here she comes. Each step clicks softly against the marble. The air smells of incense and tension. Guards stiffen as she passes. No one dares stop her, but everyone watches. And then you reach the final door, the Great Hall of Xerxes, the place where thrones are carved from ivory and decisions from impulse. The doors open, Esther enters, and time pauses. You stay just inside the threshold as she stands across from him, the king of Persia, wrapped in gold and surrounded by silence. He looks up. You don't breathe. You don't move. Neither does Esther. The world spins on the tilt of a glance. And then he lifts the scepter, not slowly, not reluctantly. He lifts it like he's been waiting for her all along. Esther steps forward and touches the golden tip. She says nothing flashy, nothing grand, just if it pleases the king. Her voice is soft, but the courage in it could part oceans. And he listens. You feel the holy irony begin to unfold. This man who ruled 127 provinces, who could order a man's death with a flick of his hand, cannot say no to this woman's calm presence. He smiles. What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be given to you. And here you expect her to ask for deliverance, to beg for her people. But she doesn't. She says, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared. You blink. A banquet. You lean closer, listening for some kind of clue. But there is none. Esther isn't panicking. She isn't improvising. She's waiting. This is something deeper than strategy. It's discernment. Some theologians believe she hesitated out of fear, but others see it as obedience to timing only God could orchestrate. Because you feel it too, the spirit is not done setting the stage. The king agrees. Haman is summoned. And just hours later, they sit in Esther's private quarters. Velvet cushions, rich wine, the scent of roasted lamb and honey-glazed fruits. Esther pours each cup herself, hands steady, eyes lowered, heart tuned like a harp. Haman is elated. Imagine it alone with the king and queen, honored above all nobles. Pride hums through him like a song he wrote himself. And again the king leans forward. What is your petition? It shall be granted. What is your request? Up to half my kingdom. Esther pauses, and once more she waits. If I have found favor in your eyes, let the king and Haman come again tomorrow to another banquet. Then I will answer. You feel the tension ripple under the table. But the king agrees, and Haman leaves puffed up with glory, his mind already drafting the tale he'll tell at home. You, however, follow Esther back to her chamber. She exhales not with fear but release, because now you understand her courage isn't in what she says, it's in what she withholds until the time is right. She has seen something, heard something, felt something, and so she waits, even with her people's lives hanging in the balance, even with her heart beating like a bird against a cage, because she trusts the one who brought her this far to finish what he started. And you start to remember your own moments of delay. Times when the door opened, but the words weren't ready. Times when your instinct said now, but heaven whispered wait. And you begin to wonder, what if the waiting wasn't weakness? What if it was wisdom? Esther's silence at the first banquet doesn't diminish her power. It multiplies it. Because sometimes the holiest thing you can do is not speak too soon. Not act until the spirit breathes now. You look out at the palace gardens as night falls again. Somewhere a king dreams. Somewhere Haman schemes. But here, in a quiet room where a queen folds her hands and steadies her soul, a miracle is still forming. And you can almost hear the rustle of angels shifting into place. The second banquet looms like a hush before a thunderclap. You float beside Esther as she prepares again. Everything looks the same, the gold bowls, the linens, the wine. But underneath the repetition lies something sharper, intentional. The kind of stillness that only comes when the storm is about to break. She selects the menu herself. Roasted lamb, dried apricots, wine spiced with cinnamon and clove, every choice precise. Not because she's trying to impress the king, but because tonight the curtain lifts. The truth hidden behind veils and silks is about to step into the light. Outside the banquet hall, the city buzzes, but inside this private room, time slows. The king enters, warm, curious, slightly amused, as if still wondering why his queen, so reserved, so careful, has invited him twice without answering his question. Haman follows, grinning. He thinks he's being honored. He thinks the queen favors him. You sit beside him and feel the weight of delusion as thick as the honeyed wine in his cup. They eat, they drink. Laughter dances briefly around the table. The king leans back in his chair, his appetite satisfied, but his curiosity sharp. He turns to Esther. Now, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted. What is your request, even to half my kingdom? You hold your breath, but this time Esther doesn't hesitate. She rises. And this is not the trembling girl in fasting robes. This is a woman clothed in holy confidence. Her words don't rush. They are steady, and each one lands like a stone in water, rippling outward, unstoppable. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. The king frowns. Confused, Esther continues. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to perish. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. But this is annihilation. You feel the weight of her voice. She isn't just speaking truth. She is unveiling it. The king's expression darkens. Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do this? And then she turns, eyes fixed, steady. The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. The words strike like lightning. You feel the atmosphere shatter. Haman stiffens, pale, speechless. The king rises in fury, his robes swirling like storm clouds. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He storms into the garden, trying to contain the rage of a man who suddenly realizes he gave the ring to the enemy. Haman stays behind, with Esther. He panics, falls at her feet, pleads, grasps for her mercy like a drowning man grabbing air. And that's when the king re-enters and sees him. Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? The words aren't a question, they're a verdict. In a corner, a eunuch speaks, Harbona, silent until now. There is a gallows 50 cubits high standing at Haman's house. He made it for Mordecai, the man who saved the king. The king's voice slices through the room. Hang him on it. You feel no pleasure, only awe, because this isn't revenge. It's reversal. The enemy who plotted in silence now meets justice in daylight, and the instrument he prepared for the righteous becomes the altar of his own undoing. You walk with the guards as they drag Haman out. He doesn't scream. There's no protest, just silence. The kind that settles when the truth finally speaks and pride has nothing left to say. The gallows loom above Susa, 50 cubits high, built for ego, now repurposed by justice. And beneath them, the city begins to murmur, not with rebellion, but with recognition. The queen is one of us. Whispers ripple through courtyards, through bakeries, through merchant stalls. Esther is a Jew. And suddenly everything changes. Because the moment she spoke, the moment she stopped hiding, salvation began to move. You walk back to her chamber. She sits alone, uncrowned, exhausted. But you can see it, the quiet light in her eyes. Not pride, not power, just peace. Because the truth is free now. Some say it was clever politics. Others say it was fate. But you know better. You were there in the fasting, in the fear, in the pause between banquets. And now you see how every moment led here. To a feast where death lost its appetite. To a table where evil was unmasked. To a room where silence was finally broken, and God, though never named, was present in every word. You step outside with the wind. It's late now. Lanterns flicker in the palace windows, their gold trembling in the breeze. But the city doesn't sleep, not tonight, because Haman is gone, and his fall wasn't quiet. You pass clusters of murmuring servants' guards who speak in hushed tones, noblemen sending urgent letters. The gallows still stands empty now, but its shadow stretches across rooftops and alleyways like a warning carved in air. You drift toward Mordecai. He stands in the outer court, still in his worn garments. No crown, no fanfare, just the weight of everything he's seen. He's not celebrating, not yet, because he knows the decree still stands. The king may have executed Haman, but the scroll that ordered the Jews' annihilation still sealed, still valid, still ticking. You walk with him through the stone corridors as he approaches Esther again. She's in her chamber this time, seated by the window, arms folded. She already knows. Even with Haman dead, her people are not yet safe. There's no celebration in survival when a sword still hangs by law above your head. Mordecai says nothing. He doesn't need to. She nods once, then stands. And you feel it, the courage hasn't run out. She walks straight to the king once more, again uninvited. And again he extends the golden scepter. But this time Esther doesn't begin with a question. She begins with grief. Tears catch in her throat as she kneels. If it pleases the king, she says, and if I have found favor in your sight, let it be written to revoke the letters sent by Haman that ordered the destruction of my people. You see the king's expression shift, not confusion this time, but frustration. Understand, he says slowly, no decree written in my name and sealed with my ring can be revoked. The law is permanent, even for a king. You feel the weight of it settle over the room like dust, a deadly echo from ink already dry. But then he turns to Mordecai. You may write another decree, he says, in the name of the king. Seal it with my ring, whatever seems good to you. And just like that, the reversal begins. You follow Mordecai as he's clothed in royal garments, blue and white linen, and purple, a golden crown gleaming on his head. The robes fit not like reward, but like restoration. Like a chapter finally turning. He enters the scribe hall, scrolls and ink, wax and parchment. You hear the scratching of pens as the new decree is drafted. Not to cancel the old one, because it cannot be undone, but to answer it. A mirror law. On the same day the Jews were once marked for destruction, they are now granted permission to gather, defend themselves, and strike down any who would attack them. It is not vengeance, it is survival resanctioned. The message is written in every language for every province. You fly alongside the royal couriers as they race across the empire, scrolls clutched in leather tubes, horses frothing at the mouth with urgency. Hope rides with them. And in its wake, fear begins to change sides. You land in a distant village, a poor settlement of exiled Jews. They gather around the scroll, children peering between legs, mothers clutching hands. An old man reads aloud, and when he finishes, there is no shouting, no dancing, just tears. Because salvation doesn't always come with trumpet blasts. Sometimes it arrives in ink and wind. Back in Susa, the city erupts. Not in violence, but in joy. Because when hope comes after death seemed certain, the only appropriate response is awe. Mordecai walks through the capital now with a dignity deeper than robes. People cheer. Even many of the non-Jews begin to align themselves with him, some out of admiration, some out of reverence, and others out of holy fear. You remember Haman's pride, his noise, and now you see Mordecai's quiet authority. No parades, no boasting. Just scrolls sent, justice written, people protected. Esther watches it unfold from her window. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to, because now her people know who she is, and because of her voice, they're still alive. You pause here, long enough to breathe in this divine tension, that sometimes the enemy falls before the battle even begins, that sometimes deliverance looks like a woman speaking truth, and sometimes God answers not by erasing threats, but by giving his people the authority to stand in them. The decree remains, but so does the power to resist. The gallows remain, but so does the memory of reversal. The king remains, but now so does the queen's name. Spoken, known, and never again hidden. You find yourself standing in a courtyard under the stars, Susa still humming from the wave of the new decree. Lanterns flicker like fireflies caught in prayer. Yet even in the celebration, something deeper curls beneath the surface, a sacred pattern unfolding. You begin to see it now. Nothing in this story is coincidence. Every delay, every silence, every sleepless night, every reversed decree. It's not randomness, it's orchestration, a divine melody only discernible once all the notes have been played. You think back, why did the king read that scroll on that sleepless night? Why was Mordecai not rewarded immediately after saving the king's life? Why did Esther hesitate at the first banquet? Some say it was clever storytelling, but others you know better now. This is the language of divine timing. Esther's story pulses with unseen order. Every twist has weight, every delay has purpose. Even the hidden things the name of God never mentioned are part of the sacred rhythm. Some scholars suggest that the book of Esther is an invitation to see God's hand in stories where his name is hidden, where his voice doesn't thunder, where his will isn't announced by prophets but by patterns. You think back to the beginning, to Hadassah, to the orphan girl who never heard a burning bush or saw an angel, but still walked into history with nothing but obedience and borrowed courage. You realize something personal here. Maybe you've been measuring God's presence by how loud he feels. But what if he's been orchestrating all along? Whispers in the hall, favor in silence, protection behind curtains. You think of your own life, the missed train, the delayed reply, the door that didn't open when you begged it to. What if that wasn't failure? What if it was placement? You walk beside Mordecai again. He moves through the palace with calm awareness, as if he too senses the divine breath curling around every corner of the story. People greet him with reverence, some with joy. Even those outside the Jewish faith now look at him with a strange kind of awe. Not because he rose to power, but because he rose without demanding it. Haman clawed his way up the ladder. Mordecai simply stood at the gate, and when the time was right, God lifted him. Esther passes through a corridor just ahead of you. She pauses to place her hand on a tapestry embroidered with symbols of Persia's gods. You watch her fingers rest briefly on the threadwork and then move on. Because she serves a different king, one who doesn't ask for temples of marble, one who moves behind veils. You feel that thread now, the golden one, weaving through every conversation, every twist, every law. It's not loud, but it's unbreakable. You move now through the provinces again, scrolls arriving, people preparing, but not for destruction, for defense. Communities gather, arms link, prayers rise. The Jews aren't waiting to be victims. They are becoming a people again. You see women sharpening knives beside bread ovens, children carrying water for fasting elders, men reading Mordecai's decree aloud in town squares. And always you hear the undercurrent of something more. Not fear, but faith that knows what it's seen. Back in Susa, the palace reflects the shift. The king doesn't retract the former decree, but his silence has become a stage. He gave Esther permission. He gave Mordecai authority. And now the kingdom watches what faithful leadership looks like. You sit in the corner of the scribe's chamber. An apprentice turns to Mordecai and asks, "Why didn't we do this sooner?" And Mordecai just smiles. "Because it wouldn't have worked sooner." That's it. No divine thunder. Just truth shaped by trust in divine rhythm. You close your eyes and begin to count. The time Vashti refused. The year Esther was taken. The days of the fast. The moments of silence at the first banquet. The sleepless night. The forgotten reward. It all lines up like stars in a story written backward, forward, and always ahead of you. And suddenly you feel comfort not in the resolution, but in the design. Because if this much detail, this many reversals, this precise a sequence wasn't random, then neither is your story. Neither is your waiting. Neither is your silence. And neither is your victory still to come. The sun rises red over Susa. Not in anger, but in anticipation. You stand at the edge of the palace square. Somewhere beyond these walls, preparations are being made. Not for celebration, not yet for defense. Because today is the 13th day of Adar, the day Haman once marked for death, the day everything was supposed to end. But not anymore. Now it's the day everything turns. You follow Mordecai through the city. His robes are as royal as any king's, but his pace is measured. He doesn't strut. He walks like someone still aware of the gallows that stood not far from here. He greets merchants, children guards. No one is beneath his notice. And yet he's watching too, every corner, every glance. Because not everyone is celebrating. There are still enemies. Not the loud kind, the kind who wait, who held on to the first decree, who hoped no one would challenge them, who mistook a reversal for a retreat. But the Jews aren't retreating. You pass through, the Jewish quarter doors are shut, families gathered. Fathers at windows, mothers holding hands with children humming old prayers under their breath. And some ready for war if it must come. But no one leads with violence. That's the part that humbles you most. They prepare not to strike first, but to survive. The hours pass slowly. The silence is louder than battle. And then it begins. In some provinces, no one lifts a sword. Fear has already disarmed hatred. But in others, the rope tightens. Enemies rise. And the Jews rise to meet them. You hover between rooftops as the first wave of would-be attackers fall. Not by chaos, not in frenzy, but by resolve. Defense shaped in prayer, sharpened in exile, wrapped in the memory of a queen's fast. Word spreads quickly, the Jews are not to be touched. Even those who plotted keep to their homes, doors bolted, eyes lowered. In Susa, the tension is heavier. Here the conflict burns hotter, because this is the center. This is where the power used to live, where Haman's name once made people tremble. And here it's Haman's sons who rise. 10 of them, each fueled by pride, by legacy, by the desire to finish what their father began. You pass through the palace gates as they move like shadows, organized and eager, but their plans crumble. The Jews rise not in rebellion but in holy resistance. You watch the sons of Haman fall one by one. They are not named in rage but in record. Their names are remembered not for vengeance but for closure, for justice that ends a chapter. And again, no plunder is taken. No houses raided, no spoils claimed. Because this isn't about gain, it's about survival. It's about presence. You sit now with Esther hours later in the quiet aftermath. She's not resting, not yet. She has one more request. She stands before the king and asks for something strange. To grant the Jews in Susa one more day to defend themselves, and that the bodies of Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. It sounds harsh until you remember what gallows mean here. They are symbols, built for a Jew, used for a traitor. Now a statement. That evil rises but never wins. That hatred may plan, but it will not prevail. Some have questioned Esther for this request. Was it cruelty? Was it excess? But you sitting beside her feel none of that. You feel a woman ensuring that nothing lingers, that no shadow remains unchallenged, that those watching those who still teeter on the edge of hate see what comes of schemes wrapped in pride. The king agrees. The edict is issued, and the next day, the Jews of Susa stand again not with joy for bloodshed, but with the clarity that comes when a threat has been truly buried. And once again, no plunder is taken. 3 times this is repeated in the scroll. Why? Because the story wants you to remember, this wasn't about revenge. This was about removal of death. And in the absence of plunder, you see honor. Honor for life. For dignity. For the God who never appeared but never left. By nightfall the air shifts. Not with fear, but with rest. You drift into a courtyard filled with lanterns. Children run in circles. Bread is passed between neighbors. The sky above is wide and soft. Esther walks the edge of the balcony silent. You look at her and realize she didn't just save her people. She gave them permission to breathe again, to be visible again, to exist without shame, to say who they are and not apologize for it. And you carry this moment with you now, because somewhere in your life too there's a gallows being built. Some threat, some fear, some accusation. But remember, the rope tightens fastest around those who weave it in pride. And when God writes a reversal, not even a sealed law can stop it. Night has fallen again over Susa, but this night feels different. You walk through streets no longer tense with uncertainty. The gallows are empty, the decree fulfilled. The enemies have been silenced not by brutality, but by a God-woven justice that arrived exactly when it was meant to. Still, you notice the way people move slowly tonight, not because they're afraid, but because they're processing what almost happened. You pause at a doorway where a family has gathered. 3 generations around a single oil lamp. A father tells his children what the king allowed, what Mordecai wrote, what Esther dared, not as drama, but as deliverance. His voice cracks at the part where he says, "And then she stood before the king." The mother doesn't correct him, because the details don't need adjusting when truth already feels like poetry. You walk farther into the city. At the gates, Mordecai stands again, not as a rebel now, not just as a survivor, but as something else entirely. You watch him look up at the sky. There's no visible sign from heaven, no fire, no cloud, but you can see it in his eyes. Peace, not the kind that forgets the pain, the kind that remembers it and still breathes. A royal attendant approaches, bowing respectfully. "The queen awaits you," he says. Mordecai nods, and together you walk the same halls that once carried Haman's schemes. But this time they feel lighter. Esther stands near the colonnade, the moon casting silver across her robe. Her face is thoughtful, not triumphant. The victory has come, but not without weight. She turns to Mordecai, says something simple. It's not over yet. You wonder what she means until she opens a scroll and hands it to him. It's a draft, a record, a memory in ink. She's written the story down, but not just as history, as command, a decree of remembrance. You lean in as she and Mordecai finalize the document together. It's not a royal law this time. It's something gentler, but just as lasting. It names the days the 14th and 15th of Adar. It names the purpose, feasting, joy, gift-giving, and provision for the poor. It gives the event a name, Purim, after Pur, the lot Haman cast to destroy them. Because the people of God don't erase their trauma. They redeem it. They name the day after the very thing meant to kill them. So every year when they say Purim, they remember not just what almost happened, but who stopped it. You travel with the scroll again, through the empire, through whispers and welcomes, through wide-eyed elders who never thought they'd see another spring. And everywhere it goes, it brings clarity. The Jews were saved, but even more they were seen. And now they are free to speak their name, tell their story, and rest. You sit beside a fire in a small village. Bread is passed. Laughter returns in hesitant waves. And then you see it a boy, no more than 8, pull out a wooden toy. He's carved Esther's name into the side. Not Hadassah. Esther. And for the first time, it doesn't sting to say it. Back in Susa, you follow Mordecai through the city one final time this night. He walks slower, not because he's weary, but because he knows how sacred it is to walk in peace after years of waiting for death. He glances toward the gallows now being dismantled. The wood creaks as it falls. It won't be used again. And somehow that sound, the slow collapse of a structure meant for someone else's end, feels holier than any song. You think of every time you feared a threat would rise and crush you. You think of the long nights, the aching questions, the feeling that you were already forgotten. But then you remember, God wasn't absent. He was just waiting for the night between verdicts, like this one. Because sometimes before celebration comes, there is stillness, not silence. Just the soft, sacred breath between what could have been and what God made instead. So now you breathe with the city, with the queen, with the one who stood outside the gate and the one who never left it. And you know, the gallows may rise, but they will not have the final word. Morning breaks over Susa, but it doesn't roar, it exhales. The sky glows pale gold, and the air carries the weightless hush of something sacred having passed. Today is not a day for fear, not anymore. Today the queen will host her final banquet, but this one isn't for strategy, it's for celebration. You walk the halls as the palace staff prepares. Dishes are arranged with careful hands, cushions fluffed, jars of wine uncorked. But there's no sense of duty in their movements, there's joy. Quiet, reverent joy, because they all know the threat is gone. You pass by Esther's chamber. Her door is slightly ajar. She's standing at the window, gazing down at the square. Her face is still. No makeup, no crown, just peace. You listen to her whisper to herself. It's not a speech, just 5 words said softly like a blessing. For such a time as this. The phrase has come full circle. What once was a challenge spoken by Mordecai in the trembling heat of risk is now a fulfilled promise on the other side of deliverance. Esther turns and walks to her wardrobe. This time she does not reach for the royal colors. She chooses white, a robe of purity, not power, of remembrance, not royalty. Because today's victory is not about thrones, it's about reversal. You follow her to the banquet hall. It's not grand, no silk banners, no trumpets. Just a long table in a quiet garden room, lined with plates of fruit nuts, bread, and honey. The windows are open, and a soft breeze carries in the scent of rosemary. The king arrives smiling easily now. His expression toward Esther has changed, respect has replaced intrigue. Trust has replaced curiosity. Mordecai enters behind him, no longer standing at the gate, now standing beside the throne. And you sit at the edge of it all, soaking in a feast earned by obedience. Esther does not make a speech. She does not retell the story. She lets the table speak. You notice what's on the plates: roasted seeds, sweet cakes, sliced figs. Not the food of warriors, but of survivors. The conversation is light, but the undertone is weighty. Every bite tastes like testimony, because everyone here knows this could have been a funeral. You remember the first banquet, the one where Esther said nothing. The second, the one where she told everything. And now this third, the one where God finishes what he started. Some theologians call it a trilogy of revelation. Others say it mirrors the sacred rhythm of fasting, revelation, and rejoicing. But you know it as the rhythm of faith. Wait, speak, celebrate. Not all at once, but all in season. The king raises a cup. To Queen Esther, he says, whose silence was wise, whose courage was loud, and whose name will never be forgotten. She smiles, but not pridefully, just enough to say, I didn't do it alone. You feel the truth of that ripple through your chest, because the real miracle wasn't the feast or the fall of Haman or the second decree. The real miracle was a woman who kept showing up, in silence, in obedience, in timing. You glance at Mordecai. He catches your eye just for a second, and it strikes you. The man who sat at the gate is now the one who writes decrees. The girl who was taken against her will now welcomes kings to her table. This is what divine reversal looks like. Not just justice served, but identities redeemed. You walk out into the palace gardens. The air is thick with the scent of orange blossoms. You think about the quiet reversals in your own story. Moments when you were overlooked, then honored. Moments when silence gave way to something greater than words. Moments when the thing meant to break, you built you. And you realize the feast always comes last, but it always comes. You pass a young servant girl setting fresh candles along the wall. She hums to herself, not knowing you're listening. And the song, it's not about the king. It's not even about Esther. It's about God, and how he turned what was meant for mourning into joy. You sit beneath a fig tree outside, watching dusk settle over the capital. The city is resting, but not forgetting. Never forgetting. And somewhere in your soul, a table has been set too. A place prepared not for power, but for remembrance. Because this feast isn't just theirs, it's yours. Every time you survive what was supposed to end you, every time you speak when you could have stayed silent, every time you trust the waiting, you are part of the reversal. Night descends again, but not like before. This night doesn't carry the threat of hidden daggers or secret decrees. It carries stillness, the kind that follows justice. You stand with Mordecai at the edge of the palace steps. The stars above feel closer than usual, as if heaven itself has drawn near to witness the moment that evil is finally fully unseated. He looks out over the city silent. He isn't smiling. Because when judgment comes even rightly, it still weighs something. You turn toward the square where Haman's 10 sons were displayed earlier that day. Their names were read aloud in Susa one by one. Parshandatha Dalphon Aspatha. Each name echoing not with triumph, but with release. The message wasn't look what we did. It was let this never happen again. You feel that distinction in your bones. This is not vengeance, this is closure. The people needed to see the faces of what had nearly undone them, needed to name the threat and hang it up high enough that no one could pretend it hadn't existed. Even evil once defeated must be acknowledged before it can be left behind. Some scholars debate this moment. Why display the dead? Why prolong the image? But others say it was necessary. Because evil loves to hide in silence, to masquerade as memory, to return when people forget. And Esther Mordecai, they ensured it would be remembered but not resurrected. You return to Esther's chambers. She's seated by candlelight, her face, soft eyes distant. She's writing another scroll, another decree. But this time it's not about survival. It's about remembering. You lean over her shoulder and read the first line. These days shall be remembered and kept throughout every generation. The Feast of Purim is no longer an act of spontaneous celebration. It is now law. 2 days every year, one for rest, one for rejoicing, both for remembrance. Gifts to friends, provisions for the poor, shared meals, laughter, storytelling, and not a single line about victory by sword, only about the moment God turned things around. You watch her sign it, fold it, seal it, and then for the first time you see her lean back, not out of exhaustion, out of release. She's done her part. She spoke when silence could have swallowed her. She stood when fear begged her to hide. And now she rests not as a queen burdened by power, but as a woman freed by obedience. You turn inward for a moment, and you start to realize there's judgment in this story, yes, but it always bows to mercy. The Jews could have looted, burned, retaliated. They didn't. 3 times it's recorded they took no plunder, because deliverance wasn't about gain. It was about life. You walk the streets again, and though it's late, the city doesn't sleep entirely. In some homes, stories are being told. In others, food is still being shared, crumbs and wine sips offered like holy relics. You stop at a threshold and listen to a boy recite the story of the gallows. But he ends not with Haman. He ends with Esther. And she saved us all, he says with childlike certainty. You smile, because in the end, evil always overreaches. Always builds a trap so tall, so arrogant, it can't help but fall into it. But salvation moves quietly. In fasting, in timing, in feasts of reversal. You remember something else too. Judgment didn't come because Esther demanded it. It came because she waited on the moment heaven had prepared. You wonder how many traps in your own life have already collapsed behind you without you ever seeing them fall. How many gallows God dismantled while you slept. How many decrees he reversed before they reached your door. And now you rest. Not because everything is easy, but because everything is held. There will always be those who plot. But now you know they will not prevail. Not when you are covered. Not when God is writing the ending. Not when even justice wears the quiet robes of mercy. So you close your eyes tonight, not fearing what may rise, but trusting in what already fell. Morning light falls like forgiveness over rooftops and courtyards. Susa has changed. Not on the outside, its towers still rise, its streets still snake through the hills. But something in the spirit of the place has shifted. 'Cause today new letters are being written. You follow Mordecai into the scribe's hall once again. But this time there's no rush, no breathless urgency. The atmosphere hums with quiet reverence, like scribes know they aren't just copying words, they're binding wounds. He unrolls a scroll. The royal seal gleams beside his hand. He's not just second in command now, he's become the scribe of survival. The decree he pens is no longer about defense or battle. It's about memory. You read it line by line as ink dries on parchment. These days of Purim shall be observed throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, as days of feasting and gladness, of sending portions to one another and gifts to the poor. It's legal, it's tender, it's healing. Because survival is only part of the story. Celebration is the completion. You walk with the scrolls again. This time the couriers ride with ease. No desperation in their gallop, just peace woven into saddlebags. They deliver the message not with warning, but with invitation. In distant towns, children run barefoot through the dust chasing the horses. Elders lift their eyes. Families gather to listen as the scrolls are read aloud. Some nod slowly, others smile through tears. A few fall to their knees, not in grief, but in awe. Because this isn't just legal protection. This is God's exhale documented. And what once was death is now a holiday. You sit beside a woman in a small stone home. She kneads dough while her daughter shapes it into sweet spirals. For Purim, the girl says brightly, like the word was always part of the calendar. The mother just smiles, quietly stunned that they're alive at all. The reversal isn't loud, it's baked into bread, folded into gifts, poured in goblets of wine passed between neighbors who once fasted together in the dark. You realize that Mordecai and Esther haven't just rescued a people from annihilation, they've taught them how to rejoice again, how to gather without dread, how to eat without counting final breaths. How to tell the story with joy, not fear. Back in Susa, the celebration begins. Garlands are hung. Tables are filled. But you notice something strange and beautiful. For every dish shared with a friend, another is wrapped for the poor. Esther's command was clear: give to one another and give to the ones who have nothing. because a feast is not a feast unless everyone eats. And that's when you begin to see the pattern deepen. New letters replace the old ones, but they remember them. They don't tear down the memory of what almost happened. They bless the scar. They transform the very thing meant to destroy them into a day of blessing. Haman cast lots to choose a day for genocide. Now that day is called Purim, named after the lots, claimed by grace. Some theologians call it a brilliant inversion. Others say it's God's favorite way to write history through reversal. You call it what it feels like? Redemption. You pass Esther in the garden that evening. She's plucking rosemary, handing it to one of her maids. Her voice is soft but full. The people no longer hide who they are. They say Jew with pride now. They say Esther with reverence. And they say Purim with laughter. You ask yourself quietly, how does pain become a holiday? And the answer comes like a whisper. When you let God write the second letter. The first letter called for destruction. The second called for defense. But the third one invites you to celebrate not just what you survived, but who you became in the surviving. That's why these scrolls matter. Not because they preserve a law, but because they preserve the mercy after the verdict. You remember the gallows. You remember the fast. And now you remember the laughter around the table. They're all parts of the same divine document. And the signature at the bottom, still invisible, still holy, still his. You rise before the sun. Today is the 14th of Adar, and the city of Susa begins to stir with a sound you haven't heard in weeks, gentle joy. Not the explosive kind that shouts from rooftops. This joy is low and warm, baked into bread ovens, folded into garments whispered through doorways. You walk beside a boy carrying a basket. His feet are dusty, but his grin is clean and wide. Inside the basket are 2 wrapped loaves and 3 dried fig bundles, gifts to neighbors. As he walks, he sings. Not a hymn, not a war song, but a Purim tune. One his mother taught him last night while she braided his hair and told him how a queen once stood still while fear tried to swallow her. You round a corner and step into the marketplace. But there are no merchants shouting, no arguments over silver. Instead, people exchanging packages, sharing wine, hugging, laughing quietly. You think to yourself, this should have been a day of mourning. This was meant to be the day the empire bled. But instead, it's the day God turned fear into rest. The irony is impossible to ignore. The lots were cast Purim for this exact date, a number chosen in secret by a man who thought God was absent. But now, that same day is a feast. You remember the phrase from earlier, the day no one died. And that's what it feels like here. Because the power of the second decree wasn't just in the sword, it was in the permission to breathe, to live, to stand without apology. You stop at a home where an old man sits at the threshold. His head is covered in a prayer shawl, but beneath it his hands are open, receiving guests, giving figs and coins to children. He glances up and mutters, "I never thought we'd see this day." And then he laughs. Not because it's funny, but because it's true. You walk into another neighborhood and see families seated on rugs beneath flowering trees. They're telling the story aloud. Each home has its own version. Some begin with Mordecai's refusal to bow. Others start with Esther being taken. Some even start with Vashti because the whole story hinges on a queen who said no, so that another could say yes. The story weaves through the streets like a ribbon flowing from voice to voice. No 2 retellings are the same, but everyone ends the same way. And that's why we celebrate. Back in the palace, Mordecai finishes writing one last letter. A personal one. You watch him seal it and hand it off to a courier. To my cousin Hadassah, the outside reads. Inside, you never get to see it. But you suspect it's not a letter full of thanks or politics. You think it probably just says you did it, and we saw it, and we love you. Because sometimes quiet affirmation means more than royal proclamations. You find Esther in the royal kitchen, not giving orders, but helping pass trays. The servants try to shoo her away, but she just smiles and insists. She chooses the biggest figs, the sweetest cakes, the cups with no cracks. Because today isn't about thrones. It's about togetherness. Even kings and queens sit at the same table today. Even those who nearly didn't survive now feast like they've always belonged. You pause beneath a fig tree and look upward through the branches. Somewhere above all this, the quiet laughter, the clinking of wine cups, the fading echo of fear, God watches. And maybe he smiles. Not because the people built temples or shouted his name, but because they remembered. Not just what he did, but how he did it. In timing, in silence, in letters, in banquets, in the very date their enemy chose for death. You realize now God didn't cancel the day. He redeemed it. He allowed it to remain on the calendar, but filled it with joy instead of grief. And that's the kind of miracle that lasts. Because someday, when the trauma fades and the empire forgets, the people won't. They'll read the scrolls. pass the baskets, eat the fruit, and say, "We were supposed to die today, but instead we danced." The 15th of Adar dawns in Susa, and this time it feels like a memory wrapped in morning light. You wander the palace grounds as gentle laughter echoes from the streets. Today those who fought on the 14th rest, and those in the capital rejoice a day later because their battle lasted just a bit longer. But no matter which day they celebrate, they all remember. This is the second day of Purim, and you notice something more subtle in the air now. The feasting is still happening, yes. The wine still pours. But today is heavier with meaning. The kind of meaning that comes after survival. After breath returns. After you look around and realize you're still here. You pass a merchant preparing small satchels of lentils and raisins, tying them with twine. One for each widow, he says without being asked. One for each orphan. You realize the victory wasn't bloodless. Some didn't make it. Some fell defending others. Some stood in places of danger so others could sit in places of peace. And so today is a celebration, but also a remembrance. You follow a trail of children carrying platters of sweets to the poor. It's not charity, it's covenant. A living echo of Esther's decree, no one left out, no one forgotten. Back at the palace, Mordecai stands in the scribe's chamber again. He's not writing now, he's listening. A young man reads the full decree aloud, stumbling once over a name Parshandatha, then laughing softly at his mistake. Mordecai just nods, because names matter, even the names of enemies. They remind us where we were, so we know where we are. Esther is in the garden walking the path of lilies. You sit beside her for a long time. She doesn't speak, not because there's nothing to say, but because the silence itself feels holy. This is her last recorded day. Her story ends here in the celebration of a people who now live because she stepped forward. She didn't return to public speeches. She didn't seize power. She simply lived and let others live because of her. Some believe she guided the kingdom in quiet ways for the rest of her life. Others say she returned to a quieter existence remembered only by feast and scroll. But either way, she never had to prove anything again. Because legacy isn't built from applause, it's built from obedience. You drift now through the outer courts where scrolls are being copied. A young scribe turns to his teacher and asks, "Why didn't God speak in this story?" The teacher smiles. "'Cause he didn't need to." You feel it too. He didn't part seas. He didn't send fire. He didn't thunder from the mountain. But he moved every piece. And now with the final letters written, the last decrees sealed, the final meals shared, you understand what the ring really meant. Not just the power to write law, but the power to seal restoration. You think of the ring that once belonged to Haman, given back to the king, then given to Mordecai, a full circle redemption. The same tool that was used to condemn now seals protection. You let that sink in for a long moment, because it tells you something huge about the way heaven works. God doesn't just destroy evil, he reclaims what it tried to use. He takes tools of harm and turns them into instruments of mercy. He takes symbols of fear and makes them vessels of hope. The ring, the date, the name, even the gallows. All of them reversed. All of them rewritten. All of them now part of a story that ends with feasting instead of funerals. You walk one last time through the city just as the stars begin to rise. A child pulls on your sleeve and offers you a slice of honeyed bread. "It's for Purim," she says. You smile and take it. It's warm, sweet. But more than that, it tastes like a world rescued. And you whisper to yourself something you didn't fully believe when this began. God remembers what man forgets. He remembers the forgotten one at the gate. He remembers the girl taken from her home. He remembers the injustice left unrewarded. And at the right moment, he turns everything back around. You rise early walking through the still sleeping city and something feels freshly born. Not just relief, not just survival, but something like identity rediscovered. You pass windows with curtains still drawn, but inside you can sense what's happening. Someone is writing down a story they were afraid to tell before. Someone is praying with their whole name, no longer afraid to say Jew aloud. Someone is wrapping leftover sweets to carry to a widow who couldn't make it to the feast. Because Purim isn't just a celebration, it's a response. A response to fear, a response to erasure, a response to the threat that said you don't belong here. You walk beside Mordecai again. His steps are steady now. The scroll has been sent, the people are safe, but his work isn't over. He knows after every rescue there's rebuilding. He moves through the palace with less armor, more intention. His eyes don't scan for enemies anymore. They look for gaps, wounds, forgotten corners. A child with no father, a widow with no roof, a village still too scared to dance. Because survival creates space, but restoration fills it. You arrive at the royal archive. Mordecai meets with scribes again, not to record war, but to record joy. Write it down, he says, so they never forget. And they do. Names, events, decrees, days, all marked, all sacred now. You listen as one scribe says, "Strange, isn't it? A whole holy day born from a secret queen and a forgotten gatekeeper." Mordecai smiles. "Not so strange," he replies, "just divine." You drift then into a nearby village, small, quiet, barely a smudge on the map. Yet here, too, they're celebrating. Not with golden trumpets, but with dates passed from hand to hand and songs sung over candles. They don't have much, but what they do have they share, because joy that's not shared turns sour. And this joy has been too long in the making to go sour now. You sit beside a group of elders retelling the story once more, but this time they speak of the moment after the reversal. How hard it was to accept peace. How strange it felt to trust joy. One woman whispers it was like learning to breathe again. Another answers, or realizing you'd been holding your breath for years. You understand. Sometimes the most difficult part of survival isn't the battle, it's believing you're allowed to rest afterward. That the thread is really gone. That the rope will not return. But the scroll says what the soul needs to hear, it is finished. And not only that, it's now law to celebrate, to feast, to laugh, to give. Because there's something sacred about joy after sorrow. It's not just recovery, it's testimony. You return to the palace one more time. Esther is in the hallway watching the sun bleed into golden tile. She doesn't say much. She simply rests her hand on the wall where once she leaned to steady herself before entering the king's chamber. The same wall, the same woman, but everything is different, because before she stood with trembling. Now she stands with legacy. She says only this, "They'll tell our story, won't they?" You answer with your silence, because they already are. Not just the scribes in the archive, but the mothers baking sweets, the boys learning names, the girls wearing invisible crowns. Every act of remembering is a continuation. Every feast is a new scroll written with flour and figs. And every gift to the poor, a final word to evil you didn't win. You pass through the city gates again. And this time they don't feel like boundaries. They feel like invitations. Because what began as deliverance for one people has become a pattern for all people. When injustice rises, God will reverse it. When silence is necessary, God will still speak. And when celebration comes, don't forget the poor. Because no story of salvation is complete without someone else being blessed by the victory you survived. You carry this with you now. The decree is sealed. The ring has spoken. The joy is law. And the celebration, it's just beginning. The sky over Susa softens with late afternoon light, the kind that makes stone walls glow and casts long, quiet shadows over memory. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because there's something in the air you don't want to rush past. A kind of divine residue, like the breath of God still lingers in the folds of this story. And suddenly you notice something strange. God's name was never mentioned. Not once in all these scrolls. Not in the decrees, not in the banquets, not in the cries for help. Not even in Esther's whispered prayers. But now that the noise has faded, that detail doesn't feel like absence anymore. It feels like intentional presence. Because everywhere you look, his fingerprints are there. You retrace the arc of it all. A queen deposed at just the right time. An orphan raised in silence. A plot overheard by the man everyone ignored. A sleepless night. A scepter extended. A decree reversed. A gallows never used as planned. Coincidence, that's what the world might say. But you know better. Because sometimes God hides so you'll learn to see, not with your eyes, but with your trust. You sit beneath a fig tree watching children reenact the story. One plays Mordecai his robe, a blanket tied with string. Another pretends to be the king waving a spoon like a scepter. A girl steps forward as Esther and lifts her chin proudly. None of them say God's name, but he's in every gesture, every smile, every step in their little reenactment. You remember what a rabbi once said, the absence of God's name is the invitation to find him on every page. And now that you've lived through it, you have. He was in the silence of the fast, in the space between two banquets, in the choice to wait, in the ink of a counter decree, and now even in the feast. You stand and walk toward the palace library. Inside, scribes carefully copy the book of Esther onto scrolls. Each line meticulous, no embellishments, no theophanies, just history wrapped in holy disguise. You pause over one scribe's shoulder as he adds the final flourish to the last verse. And the command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. Not God said, but Esther confirmed. A woman, a queen, an orphan. And you feel the magnitude of that. Because in a world where God's name was often spoken only by prophets and priests here, he chose to move through a woman who never once claimed to speak for him. But everything she did, it carried his weight. You sit in that mystery for a while. God didn't show up in thunder. He hid in courage. He didn't give visions. He gave timing. He didn't speak from a mountain. He moved through ordinary obedience. And in doing so, he did something even more miraculous. He made every reader of this story into a seeker, and every seeker into a believer. Because if he could be found in this, he can be found in you. You walk back outside, your eyes now sharpened, to spot him where he isn't named. In the child passing bread to a stranger. In the woman whispering thanks before drinking her wine. In the man sweeping the doorstep with tears in his eyes. God is there, present in the echo, present in the survival, present in the names we almost forgot and the silences we now understand. And most of all, present in the reversal. Because when the author of life chooses not to sign his name, it's not because he didn't write the story. It's because he wrote himself into every line. And now that you've read it, you'll start seeing him everywhere, even in your own pages. The sun dips low behind the palace walls as golden light curls over Susa like a blessing. You follow Esther one last time through the inner garden. Her pace is slow now, not weighed down by fear, but lifted by completion. Her robes brush quietly over the mosaic floor, embroidered not with royal emblems, but with lilies, fig branches, olive leaves. The humble things, the holy things, and then something subtle happens. She disappears from the record. No fanfare, no eulogy, no final speech. Just silence. You feel it in your chest like a soft closing door. The scroll doesn't say where she went. It doesn't record her final days or describe how she was remembered by her people. There's no monument, no second decree in her name. Just this lingering impression like a candle that has gone out but still perfumes the room. Why? Why would a woman who risked everything, who saved an entire people, who rewrote the future, fade out of her own story? You sit with that question as the palace grows quiet. Some scholars wonder if the scribes chose to end her arc with mystery to mirror how she lived quiet, hidden, yet divinely placed. Others suggest it was intentional humility, that Esther never wanted to be remembered for her crown, only for her courage. But perhaps it's more than that. Perhaps her exit is the final act of obedience, not seeking legacy, not claiming the spotlight, just doing what had to be done and stepping aside so others could live in the space she made. You walk the outer courts now and everyone is still talking about her, but in stories, not in presence. Do you remember when she spoke to the king? She fasted for 3 days without water. My grandmother says she once touched her hand when passing in the hallway. She's become something more than a queen. She's become a symbol, a living testimony to the truth that God moves through the willing, not just the powerful. You look up toward the palace tower and wonder, was this the plan all along? Not just for Esther to deliver her people, but for her to teach them how to carry that deliverance forward without needing to be constantly seen. There's something achingly beautiful about it, how she doesn't cling to the ending, how she lets the people own their joy, build their feast, tell their story. And isn't that the mark of true spiritual maturity? Not needing to narrate the miracle you were part of, just quietly knowing it happened because you said yes. You walk down to the city's edge where vineyards stretch into the horizon. You pause under a pomegranate tree. The fruit is in bloom, full, heavy, ripe with seeds. You think of her Hebrew name, Hadassah. It means myrtle, a plant that thrives in hidden places, fragrant when crushed, evergreen through every season. It was never about the palace. It was always about the roots. The roots that held her through the separation, the fasting, the waiting, the courtroom silence, the second banquet, the scrolls. And now those same roots stretch out under the soil of every Jewish home preparing for Purim. She isn't there in person, but she is everywhere in presence. Because legacy isn't always statues or stories carved in marble. Sometimes legacy is bread shared at a feast. A girl reading her name aloud during the Megillah, a crown drawn in the margin of a scroll. A whispered reminder you were born for such a time as this. You walk away from the garden now. And though Esther is no longer there, you feel her hand in everything. She didn't leave with applause. She left with peace. Because when your part is finished, when your obedience has opened the door, you don't need to stay to see it work. You can disappear and let the story live. The garden is quiet now. The final petals of the season fall like memories onto the palace stone. Esther's footsteps are no longer heard in the corridors, but her presence remains. You step out into the city once more this time, not to observe, but to feel what she left behind. And what you feel is something unexpected: protection. Not just from enemies or decrees or gallows, but from despair. From the old lie that says you are alone. 'Cause now the people know they never were. God was there, even when silent, even when unnamed, even when the sky offered no thunder and the scrolls no miracles. He protected them anyway. You walk through Susa's outer walls and the signs are everywhere. A window frame with lilies carved into the wood. A bakery called Hadassah's Table. A market stall with a woven banner that reads, "For such a time." Protection isn't always swords and guards. Sometimes it's the courage that stays in the air long after the story ends. And the greatest protector is the God who hides in plain sight. You remember the moment Mordecai refused to bow. The moment Esther stood at the threshold of the throne room. The night the king couldn't sleep. The letters rewritten. The decree turned on its head. The people rescued. None of it happened with obvious divine intervention, and yet none of it happened without him. You return now to the gate where Mordecai once sat in obscurity. Now children gather there to listen to stories. He doesn't sit at the gate anymore, but the seat remains like a monument made of absence. You hear one child ask the elder storyteller, "Why did God let it get so close? Why wait until almost the last moment?" The elder pauses, then answers, "Because when we thought he wasn't doing anything, he was doing everything." You feel that answer settle into your bones. Some say protection is what keeps harm away, but now you see the deeper truth. God's protection often looks like preparation, like placing a girl with no parents into the exact palace where salvation would be needed, like positioning a faithful man at a gate just close enough to overhear a plot, like delaying recognition until the moment honor could bring justice, like a feast that doesn't start with laughter but with timing. Even the quiet things protected them. The fast, the restraint, the waiting, the decision not to plunder after victory, all of it was a shield. You walk now through a narrow alleyway where herbs hang from windowsills and fresh bread cools on stones. Two women exchange dried fruit and wrap each other in shawls. This isn't power, it's peace. And peace is the truest protection of all. You remember Esther's silence, how long she waited before speaking. Some called it fear, but now you understand it was discernment. Because sometimes to protect what matters most, you must be willing to be misunderstood, to wait, to fast, to hide in plain sight, to let God arrange every unseen piece. You move again past the old gallows. The wood has been dismantled, repurposed for homes and furniture. The symbol of death turned into places people can live. Even that is protection. Not erasing what was, but transforming it into what can be. And that's what God does best. He doesn't just shield you, he rewrites the very thing that tried to undo you. You return to the heart of the city, to where the scroll is read each year. You sit among those gathered. Some nod, some weep, some laugh. And all of them lean in at the same moment, the moment when Mordecai tells Esther she might have been placed here for such a time as this. You feel it again. That sudden realization that this isn't just about them. It's about you. Because the God who protected Esther still protects you. Not always with spectacle, but with placement, with preparation, with peace that passes understanding. He positions you, covers you. And when the time is right, he brings the protection from silence into story. And now that story lives in you. The wind shifts slightly as you walk the city outskirts. It carries with it the faint sound of laughter, genuine open-heeled. You follow it past rows of blooming almond trees and baskets still full of yesterday's gifts. But something else moves beneath the joy today. Weight. Not the weight of fear. That's long gone. It's the weight of something more permanent, more costly. The weight of the crown. You feel it now, not on your head, but in your spirit. The pressure Esther must have lived with daily. The balance between two worlds, between palace and people, between silence and speech, between risk and rest. Because the crown doesn't disappear just because the crisis is over. It stays, and it brings with it the burden of remembering who you are after the deliverance. You return to the palace, walking the familiar halls where Esther once fasted in stillness, once walked into death's shadow, once unsealed her truth. But now those same halls are filled with music incense and the clinking of cups, and yet you feel her absence. Because Esther didn't cling to the crown like a prize. She wore it like a calling. The weight wasn't in the gold or the jewels. It was in the responsibility to act when no one else could. You sit beneath a balcony where nobles now debate policy, trade, and alliances. Their robes are heavier, their speech more formal. But none of them mention what the crown cost. Esther never made it about herself. She never took credit. She simply carried the weight until the story no longer needed her to. You think back on the day she was taken, not crowned, taken. Removed from her home, washed, perfumed, trained, displayed. and still she never lost herself. She wore what they gave her, but kept what mattered hidden, until the right moment came, until the cost of silence became too great. And then she put everything on the line. Her name, her nation, her life. And that's what wearing a crown truly means. Not having power, but using presence. Not commanding armies, but standing in front of one man and telling the truth. You pass Mordecai in the scribe's hall again. He's reading a letter, nodding slowly. You wonder if he feels it too, the same invisible weight Esther carried. He doesn't sit on a throne, but he too carries a kind of crown now. The crown of leadership, the crown of influence, the crown of stewardship. Because saving the people was just the beginning. Now comes the care, the wisdom, the justice. You walk with him through the city. Children wave, adults bow slightly. Not from fear, but from gratitude. And Mordecai never lets it go to his head, because he knows what it means to be lifted only after long obedience. You turn a corner and find a small mosaic embedded in the wall, a simple gold crown, and a branch of myrtle beside it. Hadassah, her real name, not erased. Rooted. You remember now what the name Esther means, star, and Hadassah myrtle tree. One glows in the sky, the other grows low to the ground. She was both, brilliant and rooted. Public and private, queen and orphan, crowned but humble. You sit with this duality and begin to see it in yourself. The parts of you that shine, and the parts that stay hidden only to be revealed at the right moment. That's the secret of the crown. It's not just something you wear, it's something you carry, quietly, carefully, with conviction. You hear the final lines of the Megillah read again. Mordecai the Jew was second to King Xerxes, great among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people, and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. And yet, not a single final line about Esther. Not because she was forgotten, but because her legacy lives beyond the final verse. In every child who says I matter, in every woman who speaks even when afraid, in every person who stands when silence would be easier, and in every soul who carries their crown without needing to be seen. The weight may remain, but so does the calling. And like Esther, you were placed here for more than comfort. You were placed here for impact. Evening falls with a gentle hush, as if the sky itself is sighing in relief after so many days of story. You walk alone now through streets once full of feasting past doorways, still warm from laughter, and you begin to feel it settle in your chest. Reflection? You aren't just watching Esther's journey anymore. You're feeling your own. Like a mirror has been quietly lifted, and for the first time you see it clearly. You are Esther, not in title or time, but in calling, in your restraint, in your ache, in the times you've stayed silent longer than was comfortable, in the prayers you whispered through clenched teeth, in the strength you summoned when no one clapped, when no one even saw. You remember when she first stepped into the palace. Terrified, disoriented, dressed in gold but unsure of her own name. You've been there too. Put in places that looked like promotion but felt like isolation. But now you see what that season built in her. What it built in you. Not just boldness, but timing. Not just words, but wisdom about when to use them. You've been hidden before. Not forgotten, hidden. Prepared. Rooted. And when the moment came, you spoke. Maybe not in a throne room. Maybe not with a royal robe. But in the hospital room. At the kitchen table. In the meeting, the email, the late-night voice message that said, I know who I am, and I won't stay silent. That was your if I perish moment. And now you're still here. You didn't perish. You survived. And maybe someone else did too, because you said what needed to be said. Because you stood when it would have been easier to sit. Because you wore your invisible crown with courage. You walk beneath an archway where someone has scrawled Esther's words in charcoal. I will go to the king, though it is against the law. You pause, fingers grazing the stone, and whisper the second half aloud. And if I perish, I perish. It doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like freedom. Like the kind of resolve that only comes when you finally surrender the outcome and walk fully into obedience. That's what Esther teaches you. That the story may not revolve around you, but it can move through you. And when it does, everything shifts. You keep walking and the faces of others come to mind. People who never saw their own reflection in Esther's until you made room for them. The quiet ones, the weary ones, the ones who think courage belongs to someone louder, someone stronger, someone chosen in a more obvious way. But now you know, Esther wasn't loud, she was present. And that was enough. That's all God ever needed. A heart that whispers yes, a soul that waits for his moment, a life that bends not to power but to purpose. You feel it now, the mirror still in your hand, your reflection softened by dusk. And you understand, you don't need a new name to be chosen. You don't need a palace to shift the fate of others. You just need to be willing to carry the weight quietly, to fast without applause, to speak when the trembling makes it hard to stand, and then to step aside when the task is done, like Esther, like Hadassah, like the girl with both roots and stars in her name. You tuck the mirror away not because you're done looking, but because you're ready to live what you saw. Night has deepened over Susa. The city sleeps again, this time not out of fear, but out of peace. You walk the palace corridors for the last time, fingers brushing ancient stone that once heard whispered prayers, witnessed trembling steps, carried sandals laced in silence. There's one room you haven't entered until now, the Royal Records Chamber. You push open the door and feel the dust of history settle on your skin. Scrolls line the walls like veins carrying memory to every corner. Some tell of kings and conquest. Others are just records, dates, trades, decrees. But in the center, one scroll sits open, the Book of Chronicles of the King. You know this is the place where Mordecai's name was first remembered, where a night of royal insomnia turned the tide of destiny, where a forgotten act of faithfulness became the hinge upon which the whole story swung. You lean closer. That line is still here. Mordecai uncovered a plot. So simple, so uncelebrated until the exact moment it needed to be seen. And suddenly the truth washes over you. Faithfulness is never lost, even when unrewarded, even when overlooked, even when years go by and no one says thank you. God records what man forgets. He writes in invisible ink on the walls of time, and when the time is right, he reads it aloud. You step back from the scroll, your heart heavier but fuller, because all along this wasn't just a rescue story. It was a remembrance story. God didn't just save, he remembered. He remembered Mordecai's quiet refusal. He remembered Esther's trembling fast. He remembered the decree and the dates and the threat. He remembered the silence. And then he answered it with reversal, not rushed, not dramatic, just timed with holy precision. You leave the records room and step out onto the rooftop garden. From here, you can see the whole of Susa, every flicker of torchlight, every rooftop, every sleeping home. It's not perfect. There's still brokenness, but there's also hope. Hope that rests not on loud declarations, but on the quiet faithfulness of ordinary people. That's what Esther became in the end, not just a queen, not just a symbol, but a reminder that your placement has purpose, that God's silence is never absence, that he doesn't need to be mentioned to be moving, and he never forgets the things you think he's missed. You sit on the rooftop as a breeze curls around your ankles. Somewhere below, a mother tells her child the story again. But how did she know when to speak, the child asks. The mother smiles. She didn't. She just knew who to trust. You breathe that in. Because maybe you've been asking the same thing. When to move, when to wait, when to speak, when to stay. And Esther's answer is your answer now. Trust the one who sees what you can't. Trust the sleepless nights, the closed doors, the fasting days, the unseen courage. Because he writes it all down. And one night, when you least expect it, he'll open the scroll, and everything will shift. Not because you forced it, but because you were faithful. You rise from the rooftop and begin your descent, footsteps light. Tomorrow the city will return to its rhythms. The scrolls will be rolled, the crown stored, but the legacy will live on. In every hidden yes, in every quiet moment where you choose courage over comfort, and in every time you believe this truth. You were placed here, not by accident, but by design. For such a time as this, the stars are thick above you now, like flecks of light scattered from heaven's robe. You step through Susa's outer gate once more, but this time you're not leaving in exile. You're leaving in peace, because the story has worked its way into your bones. You feel it in the way your breath has slowed your posture, softened your heart, stilled. There's no need to rush now. You're walking in the afterglow of obedience. Esther's tale is no longer distant or ancient. It's internal. You carry her choices, her silences, her reversals. You carry Mordecai's waiting, his refusal to bow, his quiet commitment to truth even when it yielded no reward. And more than anything, you carry the invisible presence of God who moved through it all without announcing himself. You walk past a small synagogue at the edge of the city. Its doors are open. Inside you hear a low chant, the reading of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther. You pause just outside, leaning against the doorway, not to listen to the plot again, you know it by heart now, but to hear the names, each one spoken aloud. Esther, Mordecai, Haman, Vashti, the 10 sons. Even the provinces, because remembering names is an act of honor, and remembering God's work through unnamed moments is an act of faith. Inside, a little girl is giggling at the part where Haman falls onto Esther's couch. A boy mimics the king's voice, pretending to shout, "Hang him on it." The adults smile not because they take joy in Haman's downfall, but because it means the children know the story. And if they know the story, they'll carry it forward. And if they carry it forward, God's protection continues. You smile as you turn away, walking toward the hillside beyond the city. The wind picks up, brushing the edge of your robe like a farewell. And as you look up, you wonder, how many others are standing under this same sky, whispering thanks for a salvation they didn't even see forming? How many gallows were dismantled behind the scenes? How many scrolls were being rewritten while they slept? How many queens in hidden places have already said yes to their moment? And how many more will rise when their hour comes? The answer is not in numbers. It's in stories. Because the kingdom of God is built through stories. Through lives offered quietly. Through risks taken in silence. Through meals shared in secret. Through courage that leaves no signature but changes everything. You feel the earth beneath your feet now, steady, soft. And you remember, Esther wasn't a warrior. She was a woman who waited, who watched, who risked, and who by God's grace was ready. And so are you. You don't need a crown to have influence. You don't need a throne to change history. You don't even need your name in the scroll to be remembered by heaven. You just need one thing, a willing heart, because God will write the rest. And when he does, it might not sound like thunder. It might sound like silence followed by reversal, a danger met with deliverance, a date marked for death turned into a day of dancing, the kind of ending only heaven could orchestrate. You breathe in the night deeply now. And as you begin your descent back toward your own quiet life, you carry the story with you, not to retell it, but to live it, one hidden act of obedience at a time. And now the story exhales. You return to where it all began, not a palace, not a banquet hall, but a quiet place inside your spirit. The part that first whispered, "What if I was born for something more?" You've walked with Esther. You've watched the scroll unfold one hidden miracle at a time. You've tasted the fear, the silence, the trembling obedience. And now you arrive not at an ending, but at something gentler, a settling. The journey didn't climax in fire or thunder. There was no parting sea, no stone tablets, no angel armies in the clouds. Just choices, moments, threads of courage woven into a tapestry that you now recognize as divine providence. This is how heaven works in real-time quiet, precise, patient. The kind of holy movement that doesn't demand your attention, it invites it. You return now to the city gates. A lone lantern flickers beside the archway. You sit for a moment listening. The sounds of celebration have faded, replaced by the hush of remembrance. Above you, the stars remain unchanged. As if to say, even when the world shifts, I am still watching. You lean back and whisper a name, Hadassah. You say it softly, not because it's sacred in its fame, but because it's sacred in its becoming. She was never meant to be a legend. She was meant to be faithful, to fast when she didn't know the outcome, to speak when her voice shook, to act even when heaven felt far away. And isn't that the life you're being called into? Not one of spotlight and crowns, but one of holy timing, of surrender before certainty, of presence before answers. You stand now and face the empty road. It stretches forward like a scroll still being written. No ink on this part yet, just the readiness of what could be. And that's where you come in. Because this isn't just a bedtime story. This is a commissioning. If you felt hidden, forgotten, passed over, know this, so was she. Until the moment heaven said now, you have your own moment coming. Your own quiet obedience. Your own if I perish crossroads. And you'll know when it arrives. Because God has already prepared it. Your job is not to force the plot. Your job is to say yes when it matters. Like she did. And in that yes, generations will be saved. Sometimes literally. Sometimes spiritually. Sometimes in ways you'll never fully see this side of heaven, but they will be saved. Because you showed up. Because you stood in the gap. Because you whispered your own so be it into the silence. And now let the scroll close gently, not with finality, but with fulfillment. Your heart has read every word, and now it carries the story forward, beating with holy memory. God's fingerprints are all over it, even the chapters without his name, especially those, because that's when he moves the deepest. So remember this, child of the quiet places. You don't need to be loud to be used. You don't need to be certain to be chosen. You don't need to be seen to be known. You just need to be willing. And when you are, the kingdom moves. The scroll turns. The story lives. And now, beloved listener, let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders soften. Let the light within you flicker like the lanterns of Susa at rest. You've walked far tonight, not through lands of fire or flood, but through the quiet terrain of courage, faith, and divine placement. You've stood beside queens who fasted. You've sat beside gatekeepers who waited. You've heard the scroll unfold not with noise, but with presence. And now may you rest in that same presence. May you know that your story is not small, that the hidden chapters are still holy, that the silence is not punishment, it's preparation. Let your thoughts drift now into gentler places. A crown set aside on a windowsill, a girl whispering her Hebrew name under a star-stained sky, a people saved not by force but by faith. You are part of that same tapestry, a thread pulled from eternity, placed exactly where it's meant to be, held by hands that never let go. So let go now of the day's burdens. Let your soul settle into still waters. Let heaven hold you like it held her. No more questions tonight. Just peace. Just promise. Just the deep knowing rest that comes when you finally understand. You were never forgotten. You were always part of the plan. End of script. Sweet dreams.